So I'm a research landscape planner with the USDA National Agroforestry Center out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And the USDA National Agroforestry Center is a joint center between U.S. Forest Service Research and Development, U.S. Forest Service State Private Tribal Forestry, and the NRCS, or Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'm a research landscape architect by background. My undergrad and master's is from Kansas State University and Utah State University, and I've been at the center for, well, it'll be 25 years in July, so it's been a good fit. I think I was destined for agroforestry, having tried to look into growing forest botanicals in my folks' shelter belt in my high school years as a way to fund my college education. That didn't pan out, but not in western Kansas with a 16-inch precip zone. But one of the things, just kind of in, I think the question on our introduction was thinking, examples, or where have we kind of thought about short rotation woody crops and agroforestry. And we have an agroforestry note on our center site, opportunities for growing short rotation woody crops and agroforestry practices. And it dates from 1998. So we've been kind of thinking about it a long time, although I would say our center's been on the periphery of it. What I will say is that we really take a broad definition to short rotation woody crops. So obviously the biomass, bioenergy, but we look at the whole range, including tree fodder potential, biochar, decorative woody florals, for instance. So really this whole gamut, we're fairly broad in our interpretation of that definition. And then I think I'll close with, I was just talking to Colleen about this, is I think short rotation woody crops and agroforestry both have the same blessing and curse. And that is, these systems can really be so flexible, can accomplish many different objectives, can go in many different landscapes, from urban to agriculture and everything in between. And that's the blessing part, right? It's really flexible and the opportunities are immense. But it's also a curse. It really is a challenge when communicating with folks what these systems can be and are, because we have to often really put some parameters around it. And so I think that's a theme as we think about these questions that we're going to wrestle with as we go into the rest of the panel.
That's a perfect segue for what I'll say about. Oh, thanks. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm Hannah Hemmelgarn. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Center for Agroforestry at the University of Missouri, and we're so glad to have the opportunity to host this amazing conference. Thank you especially to Liz and Ryan for all of your planning efforts and for the invitation to be on this panel. I have a similar, in some ways, this feeling that agroforestry has been a perfect fit for me with my kind of variable background. So I have a degree in anthropology and sociology, did my graduate work in environmental experiential education, and then further graduate work here at the University of Missouri in agroforestry. And all of those things combined, I have on-farm experience with permaculture and agroecology, and agroforestry is part of that. But I didn't know it at the time until I came back here. This is actually my hometown. So it's really just been this really nice combination of things that has brought me back to my home here and to this really important work. And I totally agree that this is one of we could see it as an opportunity or a challenge, that agroforestry is complex and it's context specific. And that means that we have to be really mindful about how we communicate about agroforestry. So at the Center for Agroforestry, I really lead our outreach and education communications team. And so this is at the center of my thinking all the time. We typically, agroforestry is an indigenous set of practices and can be so broad in how it's implemented. But we typically think of these 5 buckets, these 5 practices, in order to help sort of funnel our thinking into different areas of implementation, opportunities for implementations. We have community food forests, riparian forest buffers and windbreaks, forest farming, alley cropping, and silvopasture. And I will say we've seen probably the most growing interest in silvopasture and forest farming. I think riparian forest buffers and windbreaks have had a really long-term presence in conservation agriculture. But lately, from producers, what I am hearing is a lot of increased interest in these other practices that maybe we haven't given as much attention to in previous years. So, and then a note here that there are infinite creative ways to combine these practices, and that we sometimes have to get ourselves out of these buckets too. And this is not exhaustive. There are other opportunities, other practices that can be applied. So when I say it's complex and context specific, what I mean is that in order for us to effectively bring agroforestry onto the landscape, we need to have social readiness and relevance and ecological relevance and suitability. So we have this EPA map of ecoregions here, just as a starting place for thinking about the complexity of that and the diversity of different ecoregions to think about. So just like your example in Western Kansas, not a good fit for what you had in mind, but I'm sure there are other opportunities. And thinking about where we focus our attention for adoption and training really has to be based on these ecoregions, site suitability, and the social relevance first. So speaking to the social readiness piece, this is a map of by county in the US for the number of farmers who have implemented at least one agroforestry practice. You can sort of see there are imperfections in the way this data is collected and what it shows, and a really great article that's cited there that goes into some detail on that, what this can teach us and what limitations there are with this kind of data. But we can see that, so we're in Boone County, that's the dark blue county right in the middle of Missouri. And we can see the impact of local networks and knowledge networks and connections. So in certain parts of the US where we see a lot of activity, interaction and demonstration from farmers, we see the dark blue counties. I think that's fairly consistent. And then just to close out, I'll be giving a presentation later today, Train the Trainer for Forest Farming. And I put this together for them, but I think it's relevant for this audience too. And thinking back to how we are sharing about short rotation woody crops. What exactly does that mean? What do people hear when we communicate about that? As part of this large menu of options for agroforestry. And so this is sort of how I think about the funnel of decision making when a land steward is starting to consider agroforestry options. There's a lot to choose from. It might be guided by their personal interests, what they've been exposed to, the demonstrations, the peers around them, and what they see as successful in their area, and also by all of these other factors coming in to this funnel. So we have Extension, USDA, NGOs, all of these different groups, and producers themselves who can contribute to what is funneling in here, in addition to technical and financial incentive programs that might guide someone's decision-making process. So with that, I think I'll stop. And
that's cool, Hannah. That's really good. Yep.
Yeah, and hopefully some of this we can come back to some of these conversations when we're in discussion.
Thank
I
you,
think
Anna.
have some slides too.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. I'm Raju Sulanayakanahalli, research scientist with Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, involved in tree improvement program, particularly for agroforestry deployment. And our interest has been to use both deciduous conifers as well as shrub species such as both flower-bearing and berry-bearing for pollinator habitat and small mammals and everything. The deployment of agroforestry trees and shrubs on the prairie landscape is happening since 1901. For the government of Canada almost encouraged agroforestry for the last 114 years, where free trees were given, anywhere between 4 to 5 million trees to the prairie farmers to plant the trees, minimize wind erosion, and also trap snow. In doing so, they have changed how these grasslands, when they were originally converted to agriculture lands. Today we see resilient landscape after 100 years of continuous tree planting. So I will, in addition to the prairies, I will walk you through some of the examples of recently, Government of Canada also did what we call agriculture greenhouse gas program, where they invested close to $10 million to deploy different agroforestry practices across the landscape of Canada. So what we are trying to do is we bridge agriculture and the environment through agroforestry. In doing so, this is one example where a success story I would like to share with you all. This was the work my predecessor, Bill Schroeder, John Cote, they all started in 2006-07 in Prince Edward Island, where potato is predominant production and landscape is very hilly. Today, we see high uptake by farmers, where you see our deputy minister standing and visiting some of these nutrient intercepting buffers. Originally, it used to be grass strips. The policies got changed. Now, the farmers are allowed to deploy woody vegetation, particularly willows. That's one of the success stories I would like to say, where it started as research, policies got amended. Now, finally, we see deployment of short rotation woody crop along the riparian zones. The second example through the AGGP project is the work that happened in Ontario, one of our largest provinces, where they looked at greenhouse gas potentials in riparian systems as well as in tree-based intercropping systems that will involve nut-bearing trees and others. The third example is in Quebec, where flow stabilization, where small streams erode all the soils, so they were deploying a lot of poplars and stabilizing those flow and minimize the runoff of soil plus nutrients. When it comes to the prairies, since we had deployed for 116 years of tree deployment for shelter belt programs, at University of Saskatchewan, our Canadian colleagues, what they did was they developed tools for farmers, where a farmer can look at his different soil zones on the map. He can draw a kilometer long and say, I want to deploy poplar, I want to deploy Scots pine, I want to deploy ash, or oaks. Then they get to know how much of carbon they sequester in a 30-year period above ground, how much carbon they sequester. In that way, they have a decision-making tool to decide what would it look like 30 years down the line. And these were developed on some of the 3PG models. Then I also extend beyond Agriculture Canada to other federal institute, which is Natural Resource Canada and the Canadian Wood Fiber Center. Martin is among us, and Richard Kreger, who couldn't make it to this meeting. They are like looking at how they use municipal wastewater and willows to bring up some green solutions to minimize the investments on engineering structures. Lastly, how we manage all the biosolids was one of the issues. Ramo and Silvis have come together. Now we have, if you look at entire North America, Edmonton, Abitibi area have almost anywhere between 500 acre to 700 acres of willow planting to deal with biosolids and other municipal wastewaters. So the land, I would say this is one of the largest willow planting for North America. And John was with us. I did mention, like, John, I'm going to talk about these activities. So with that, I would stop there. And for us, agroforestry, deploying these fast-growing trees is very critical to make sure there are several green solutions beyond the engineering solutions.
I don't have any slides, but.
Colleen, well,
Hi, my name is Colleen Zumpf. I work as a researcher at Argonne National Laboratory in the Environmental Science Division. I came into this world from the environmental side. So I started off as really focused on conservation and ecological restoration. I had a big interest on the management practices and their impact on our ecological communities. So when a job opportunity opened up at Argonne that kind of was an interface between thinking about land management practices with perennials and their impacts on agronomic systems, I was really interested. The work that I presented yesterday is our long-term study and was kind of our foothold into this realm of integrating perennial bioenergy crops within agricultural systems. That study really started off thinking about how do we design those systems to maximize a lot of the benefits that we've been talking about. And as we've mentioned, these systems can be designed and they're flexible depending upon the goals of producers. In our case, we were very interested in the biomass yields as well as those water quality benefits. So trying to design that system to minimize runoff, but using those leachates to then boost biomass yields. Since then, our research team at Argonne has really delved into other designs of perennial bioenergy crops. I mentioned yesterday that some of the small-scale designs have challenges, especially when we're talking about scaling up large-scale bioenergy crops to produce the amount of biomass that we need to reach some of our national goals. So some of the strategies include looking at different crops. So in addition to willow, we work with switchgrass, we work with mixed grass plantings, and we also have a project in Florida. Those designs look at a lot of different types of landscapes. So in Illinois, we're talking about a intensively managed agricultural system, but some of our other projects include western Nebraska, which is a heavily irrigated production system, and thinking about how to use corners or replacing portions of that landscape to minimize the water usage, which is a very big problem. In Florida, we're going back to this concept of buffers because of the large issues that they have with water quality. Florida being a very heavy tourist destination, water quality has a very big impact on the recreational uses, both in-state as well as along the coastal regions. And so a lot of our work is trying to think about integrating these perennial crops within a system designed in such a way to reach whatever those goals are. We've now kind of moved from the research into more applied with one of our technical assistance programs that we've been partnering with the American Farmland Trust, and they've kind of bridged that gap between producers that have a large interest in doing something different with their land. And again, some of those reasons for adopting these practices vary. A big driver for perennial systems is those ecosystem service benefits, as well as the lower intensity management requirements for some of these systems. Some of these producers are getting close to retirement, want to do something different with their land, but don't really want to invest heavily. And perennial systems, because of that concept of being able to plant it and kind of maintain it long term, has a lot of those benefits compared to the traditional row crop systems. As Hannah was talking about, part of that project is kind of bridging that gap and thinking more strategically on how to apply these systems specific to each farmer's operation. So part of that program is designing a management plan that our partners at American Farmland Trust do phone interviews and will physically visit their field sites of where they want to go and implement these systems, and then talk to what are their operations currently, what kind of equipment do they have, what kind of storage do they have, what are their goals, so is it biomass, is it ecosystem services, and then what do they want to do with that biomass in the end, to try and start linking some of these systems, even if though they might be small, such as on-farm usage of that biomass. These management plans are trying to help design and bring to fruition, if you will, these concepts and really thinking or allowing the producers to think, how does that integrate into my current operation? So I'll stop there.
That sounds good. Yeah. Thank you for panelists for introducing yourself and the issues that are close to your heart. I was just thinking, well, almost everything that you said has relevance in New Zealand, and I'm sure it has relevance internationally. So thank you for that. We're going to now focus a little bit narrow on two questions that each of you in turn will have some input into. We'll take the same order. I think that gives you a long rest, Colleen. For the audience, the questions are posed on the screen, and the panelists will still remain seated to answer them. The first question, why would we want to integrate short rotation woody crops into agroforestry systems? And the second one, what are the synergies or advantages in doing that? Gary, over to you.
All right. I think I kind of rolled these two questions into one, but then I throw a question on the end, being the polemic, and say, maybe why would we not want to integrate them? Not that I think there are fatal flaws, but I think there are some interesting things to consider. But I'll start off with the why would we? And I didn't really say what my work was so much. It's really looking at how do we design and plan multifunctional agroforestry practices, particularly under a changing climate, and providing mitigation and adaptation services. So that is something that kind of featured into the way that I partitioned out how short rotation woody crops and agroforestry could be integrated. And I kind of put them into three buckets: compatibility, adoption, and ecosystem services. In the ecosystem services, we've already heard a lot from folks over the last couple of days. Colleen's presentation, I think, really did a nice job of kind of showing through that one project, looking at all the different kind of ecosystem services. And I had to really appreciate the call out to pollinators, because I think woody species, particularly your Populus and Salix, offer some really great resources for early season pollinators. We often think of herbaceous providing that pollination service, but there's that early spring component when the herbaceous is not out there that Salix provides critical pollen resources, and your Populus species provide resins that are important for propolis and honeybee colonies. But if I had to kind of drill down, one of the key ecosystem services that I think is mutually beneficial, and it's just the fact of getting perennial cover out on the landscape. And that is an aspect of both agroforestry and short rotation woody crops. And it's particularly key under climate change, where we're starting to see these increasing intense storm events at a time of year where there's not a lot of cover on the land. And that is where I think is one of the strengths of these systems. There's also, kind of tying into that, the landscape connectivity. The ability to really look at these larger than a farm operation and seeing how do we really try to diversify the agriculture operations. If you look historically, our farm operations were much more diverse, and over years we've specialized and simplified the landscape. And so I think this is a really key opportunity to build back in that diversification. Moving on into adoption, I think short rotation woody crops, or vice versa, agroforestry can be a gateway drug or stepping stone into one of the others. I think it offers an opportunity for producers to maybe try out one practice, get their feet wet, and then maybe build upon. And I think particularly this happens with riparian forest buffers as an initial foray into growing woody perennials on a farm operation, and then looking out how to expand upon that. Other adoption synergies I think that are out there are synergies in equipment. We've heard some of the shortcomings of the equipment availability that's out there and the need for some engineering to come up with scalable approaches. But there are kind of equipment already on operations that might be able to be modified or utilized for short rotation woody crops and vice versa. So I think there's some synergies there. and also economies of scale. We've heard that one of the shortcomings is building up enough, basically whatever the product might be, in order to support the infrastructure for doing the processing. But I want to now just drill in on compatibility with agroforestry systems, and that's where I think maybe it's most interesting. And so a couple of these are thinking of harvesting. You know, one of the advantages of potentially harvesting short rotation woody crops is they can be done during the off season and space out that temporal work for a producer. But also, as Shauna was talking about, the fodder piece, which allows you to harvest year-round and separate out maybe the components for a fodder and then a biomass. So I think those are some kind of interesting compatibilities. And then specifically to some of the agroforestry practices, looking at riparian forest buffers, we really, historically, that was considered conservation practice. And it's been in more recent years that we've looked at that as a production practice, that harvesting can be allowed in it and we can still maintain some of the ecological services that were put in there for. And in fact, some might benefit from harvesting, like water quality, if you're pulling out some of the biomass for nutrient removal, or creating some early successional habitat with the rotation. Alley cropping, I think, is a particular interesting one. You know, one of the challenges with alley cropping is the crop grown in the alley with solar exposure decreases productivity over time for most crops. However, if the row of short rotation woody crops is harvested on an interval where you reset that solar exposure clock for the alley in the middle, that might be an interesting opportunity and can kind of deal with some of that production decline that you see. Silvopasture systems, you know, again, we've already talked about the fodder potential of short rotation woody crops, but one of the key reasons we find out in our research is why people are doing silvopasture is livestock well-being, and particularly the modification of climate for livestock, particularly again under a changing climate. And so short rotation woody crops could allow you to get up some of that shade component in a fairly timely manner. And if you do appropriate rotation, you could maintain that shade and maybe distribute it across a paddock. And then kind of wrapping up with windbreaks, thinking about you have multiple rows on a harvest interval where you would harvest a row or a couple rows and then still maintain that windbreak function and then come back, harvest the other row when the other row is up in time to still maintain the windbreak functions of soil erosion and microclimate modification for crop production. So there's probably some of these opportunities that I think are pretty intriguing. Of course, I'll get now to the why nots. And again, don't think they're fatal flaws, and we've already kind of talked on it, is that communication piece. We've got a complex system to begin with, short rotation woody crops, combined with another complex system, agroforestry. Combine them, you got complexity squared or to some power. And it can be really challenging in terms of communication, communication both to producers, but to agencies, you know, policymakers and so forth. And so more how do we think about that communication piece? It's much more complex to communicate, say, than, say, other agronomic practices like cover crops or no-till. Another maybe potential challenge is the inventory or tracking and metrics. We heard about some great reports that try to track biomass production, but I know at the Agroforestry Center, we're always questioned with how many producers are using it, what are they doing, how many acres, et cetera, et cetera. And we can talk more about it, but we've embarked on building off of that census survey that Hannah showed up there, and we now have another time series data to show the change over time. But we're taking that sample and we're surveying producers with a much more in-depth survey instrument to tease apart the differences in the agroforestry practices, how many have silvopasture, et cetera, and what are they growing. But it could be a challenge of tracking these metrics as we think about combining them.
Gary, I might stop you there and pass on to one of the other
I
panel,
appreciate
and
that.
we'll pick up some
Nope,
of those things.
those were my
in the
last kind of
session.
two, so
Well
we're
done.
good.
Thank you.
Well, I will
Hannah.
be brief. You've covered a lot of ground, and you're much more deeply embedded
Yeah.
in especially the integration of short rotation woody crops and agroforestry. So I really appreciate that. And I think bringing what you were sharing together with some of what you were saying, Colleen, about really meeting land stewards where they are and with their objectives. And so much of what we do in assisting producers and training trainers to assist producers in answering these really hard questions about how to figure out the why nots and meet their needs. It's relational, right? Like our work has broadened, especially in recent years, so far beyond our typical agroforestry silos. And so I see the why of integrating short rotation woody crops as a why not? Because this is yet another important group of partners that, the work that you're doing, Colleen, with technical assistance and your team can play an important role in just adding to the resources that are available for producers. So that's kind of where I see the why. And I should have mentioned too, Gary is one of the authors, the co-authors of the paper I mentioned. And sort of coming back to that, if we really want to be intentional about integrating short rotation woody crops, then we have to make sure that short rotation woody crops, the lexicon that it's included in the lexicon that we're measuring. So to that point, we were talking before this, that ag census data doesn't include a question about is the producer including short rotation woody crops, and could it in the future? How do we figure out where the delineation is between that specific practice when it can be applied to so many practices, as you mentioned. So I think there are a lot of things to consider, and moving forward strategically and in partnership will be really important. So I'll leave it at that.
Oh, good, Hannah. If I build upon what Gary and Hannah mentioned, what are the synergies with short rotation willow systems or coppice systems into agroforestry, I would bring up like two key points. When we look, speaking from the government policies program side, yesterday we learned about like the carbon importance, how we look at carbon in a very different way. For me, these short rotation woody systems provide carbon sequestration ability to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or meet some of the general goals of Paris Agreement. We see a lot of depleted soils, and when we look at the recent reports, globally we are losing a lot of topsoil organic carbon content, and these agroforestry systems are one way where we can build that carbon level within the ecosystems and sustain our yields by having like better systems of how we deploy these fast growing trees beyond just poplars or willows. The other aspect is like the environmental pollution is a big issue. Along the riparian systems, we can deploy these trees that can just take up a lot of water and nutrients, have no issues, but build up humongous biomass and minimize the environmental footprint of whether it is phosphorus pollution is the biggest issue that we all deal with, freshwaters and even in marine systems. So there are various synergies how we can adopt some of the practices that both Gary, Hannah, and Colin mentioned here, how agroforestry can solve. When we look globally, agroforestry is practiced by 1 billion people. 1/6 of the global population practices agroforestry, and there should be a reason for it. I leave it at that.
So what can I add?
Colleen, it sounds like you've got to give that reason. You don't. Yeah.
So really to build on a lot of these talking points, as well as some of the things that I mentioned yesterday, there are a lot of little things that these systems can help. What's the word I'm looking for? promote resilience and diversification in both economic resources as well as environmental resources. Some of these practices don't have to be large scale to get the benefits that we're talking about. Carbon, although a lot of these woody crops can support below ground and store that above ground carbon over time, some of those might have a more limited scale, but things like water quality or biodiversity, integrating some of these perennial crops can have a large benefit, especially in how they're integrated within the landscape. For example, for biodiversity, we were talking about the benefits of these small buffers for insects or pollinators, or even for birds, which we might think require much larger scale, but we do see that edge effect having adding more resources for those species within those systems. Even overwintering of insect species, having a perennial system compared to a system that's tilled and disturbed can be very important. And a lot of those insects can support, predation, which is contributes a lot to pest control. As Hannah mentioned, we can think of short rotation woody crops and these perennial systems as a tool within the producer's toolbox or conservation toolbox that can be applied to support a lot of these goals. In thinking about climate, a lot of these systems, because they're perennials and they're investing in their root systems, are a lot more resilient to changes in climate. We talked about, issues with frost. We had an example recently with drought. Now I'm gonna get into my switchgrass talk. But we have a field site in South Dakota. In 2022, it was really dry. And part of my work also includes looking at satellite imagery for evapotranspiration. And it was very stark during that growing season. The rest of that landscape around our switchgrass field was completely brown by the middle of the growing season. And our switchgrass fields were green because, again, they're investing in those root systems, tapping into those water resources. And we had a lot of producers that were driving down because it's on a very busy road, and all of them had commented at the field research station, what the heck is out in that field? Because all of my fields are dead right now. And so thinking about that resilience and how climate is changing and how these systems can integrate and build that resiliency for farmers, especially from the economic side, is very important. I think that hits all of my points.